Snow fell thick enough to swallow every sound on the mountain. On the ridge, they locked the bunker door and laughed quietly. "Lock it," she secured. No one heard the slow breathing behind the frosted scope glass positioned above them. No one saw the footprints the wind erased within seconds. By dawn, the radios were completely silent. The supply corridor had no guards, and the entire ridge, the place they believed impenetrable, held only cold silence, as if winter itself had chosen her side. The northern face of Broken Spine Ridge, cut through frozen air like a blade. Wind carried ice that found skin through any gap in gear. The bunker sat embedded in granite, steel flush with rock, built to outlast anything. Colonel Marcus Webb watched the weather screen. Visibility, 30 meters. The storm had come early. -18, Lieutenant Hayes reported. Wind at 40 knots. Webb studied the tactical display, glowing lines marking defensive positions, red zones showing threats. 3 weeks of preparation, 18 operators against 1 woman in impossible weather. She picked her window, Webb said quietly. Hayes pulled up the file. Cassidy Brennan, 34. Former Arctic warfare instructor. Discharged reasons unclear. Assessment, exceptional. Profile, patient, unconventional. The photograph showed pale eyes, weather-worn features, neutral expression, nothing that explained command's concern. "Why not wait her out?" Sergeant Dalton asked. "Storm like this, she's got 48 hours before exposure kills her." "Because she knows that," Webb replied. And came anyway. Wind hammered the bunker. Thermal cameras showed white static. Motion sensors, green. 3-hour rotations. Webb ordered. No assumptions. Outside, snow erased the world. Somewhere in that white, Cassidy Brennan checked her compass and waited. The bunker door sealed 12 mechanical snaps. "Lock it," someone said. She secured. 20 meters north, Cassidy pressed against rock, invisible. Her breathing matched wind gusts, dispersing vapor. She'd counted the locks, 12. The pattern mattered. 1,847 hours. 43 minutes to move. Movement in whiteout conditions required specific discipline, not the kind taught in basic training, where speed and aggression won engagements. This was older knowledge, learned from hunters who understood landscape itself was always watching, not speed rhythm. When gusts came, 40 to 60 seconds apart, Cassidy took 3 quick steps, low and balanced. When wind dropped, she froze completely, not gradual slowing, absolute stillness, like stone. Snow helped more than thermal camouflage ever could. Every footprint she left was half filled within 30 seconds, completely erased within 2 minutes. Wind was her accomplice, destroying evidence as quickly as she created it. The mountain itself conspired with her patience. She'd memorized the terrain from satellite images taken 3 weeks prior, but maps couldn't capture texture of reality. Rock face had fissures creating wind tunnels. Snow accumulated unevenly, leaving bare patches where thermal cameras would spot movement instantly, and deep drifts where she could crouch invisible even at close range. Checkpoint Alpha was 70 meters ahead, thermal distortion from their heater marking position like a beacon through the storm. 2 men inside, probably rotating watch, probably bored. Rotation every 4 hours, standard protocol for extreme weather operations. They made patterns though. Everyone did eventually. Alpha radioed at 17 past each hour, Bravo at 31, Charlie at 44. Irregular enough to feel random, designed to prevent predictability, but it created rhythm nonetheless. A sequence the mind could anticipate. Predictability was fatal in conditions like these. She waited in a drift, covered except for a small opening. Arctic gear white on white, textured to match snow shadow. At rest, from 10 meters, invisible. Radio, crackled, Alpha to operations, perimeter clear. Copy, Alpha. She waited. 3 minutes, then moved. 3 steps in the gust. Freeze. 3 more. Freeze. The checkpoint watched outward, focused on the approach trail. She moved along a parallel ledge, narrow and hidden by overhang. The smallest oversight became fatal. Behind her, Alpha maintained watch on an empty trail. Thermal screens showed static, no alerts, no threat. Cassidy climbed higher. Wind tried to peel her off rock. She moved between gusts, timing each handhold. 90 meters from the bunker now, approaching from an angle their defensive plan hadn't prioritized. Not carelessness, thoroughness had patterns too. Snow fell harder. Tracks vanished as if she'd never existed. Radio Bravo to operations. All clear. Copy Bravo. She smiled slightly. They watched all the right places. That was the problem. Darkness changed thinking. Not visibility, thermal optics solved that. Darkness changed how people interpreted signals, moved from observation to action. Cassidy reached position at 2023 hours. Rock outcropping, cover from 3 directions, clear sight to the bunker's eastern ventilation. Not the main entrance, too obvious. But sealed bunkers needed air exchange. Air exchange meant openings. Rifle assembled slowly, scope mounted, specialized weapon, subsonic ammunition, suppressor for extreme cold. At 200 meters, barely a whisper. But she wasn't shooting anyone. First target, communication array on the bunker roof. Small satellite dish maintaining their link to command. Take it out, they'd fall back to radio. Radio had limitations in mountain terrain. She settled into position, breathing controlled, heart rate dropped, scope reticle on the dish, wind from northeast, gusting. She waited for the pattern, the brief stillness. 20 seconds. 40. The lull came. She fired. Subsonic round crossed distance in silence. Dish sparked once, went dark. No explosion, just a critical component severed. Inside, someone would notice signal loss. Assume storm interference. They'd adapt. Adaptation created predictable responses. 15 minutes. Motionless. No alarms. Shot had been silent enough, they blamed weather. Second target. Motion sensor grid. Mesh network. Repeater nodes at 40-meter intervals. Reliable. Standardized. Predictably placed. She'd mapped the grid. Now she moved to the nearest node. Small weatherproof box on rock. Wire cutters. Bypass jumper. Electrical tape. 4 minutes. She didn't destroy it. That triggered alerts. Created a feedback loop instead. Node reported clear status constantly, regardless of actual movement. Still functioned. Still checked in. Just stopped telling truth. Security display would show green. All sensors active. All zones clear. By midnight, 3 nodes compromised. Blind corridors and coverage grid. Paths where she could move without alerts. Work was meticulous. Weather made fine motor control nearly impossible. Fingers numb despite gloves. Core temperature dropping. Early hypothermia edges. She'd planned for it. Rest periods, cached supplies. Knew exactly how long before cold became critical. 0147 hours. She withdrew to prepared position. Small cave, just large enough. Invisible from any approach. Chemical heat pack. Just enough warmth to stabilize core temperature without thermal signature. High-calorie rations. Insulated water. Exactly 90 minutes rest. Not sleep rest. In the bunker, night watch continued. Radio checks on schedule. Thermal cameras swept zones. Everything appeared normal because she'd made it appear normal. Art wasn't violence. Violence was easy, obvious, final. Art was creating doubt, introducing uncertainty, making them question perceptions. Doubt corroded, made people second guess, hesitate, make mistakes. 0312 hours. 90 minutes. Already planning next phase. Outside, wind howled. Inside the cave, Cassidy Brennan's breathing was slow and controlled. Dawn never came storm too thick. Darkness shifted to gray murk. Light quality changed just enough to make thermal imaging less effective. Cassidy moved since 0500, before day rotation. Wind had shifted overnight northwest instead of northeast. Mountain weather was chaotic. She'd studied forecasts, knew the shift was probable, planned for it. New wind changed everything. Yesterday's exposed routes were sheltered. Yesterday's cover was wind tunnels. Terrain rearranged by atmospheric pressure. She approached Checkpoint Bravo using new wind pattern for concealment from angles they hadn't prioritized. Wind pushed snow into drifts that blocked sightlines in ways that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. From 70 meters, thermal distortion marked their position. 2 operators, hour 16 of deployment. Adrenaline faded, grinding middle phase. Vigilance became routine. Routine became complacency. 0647, Checkpoint radioed scheduled update. Bravo to operations. All clear. Copy. Bravo. Storm continuing through 1600 hours. Understood. 17 minutes later, one operator stepped outside briefly. Not patrol frustration with confinement. 30 seconds in the wind. Back inside. They were tired, restless, feeling the weight. She circled wide, 200-meter berth, using terrain and new drifts for concealment. Target wasn't the checkpoint, it was the supply corridor beyond. Corridor was critical vulnerability. Bunker could withstand siege if supplies flowed. Food, water, fuel, ammunition, all came up one narrow trail, checkpoints protected. Protecting corridor meant pattern, supplies at intervals, security sweeps on schedule, pattern necessary for coordination, pattern exploitable. 0734 hours. She reached where supply trail narrowed between rock walls. Natural choke point, impossible to bypass. Thermal sensors and cameras covered every meter. She didn't go through. Climbed above it 40 meters vertical rock, wind trying to tear her off, gloves making grip nearly impossible. She made it. Other side of choke point. Trail continued. Less protected because choke point was supposed to be impassable. Supply cache pre-positioned, marked with thermal beacon invisible except to right scanner. Fuel, rations, medical supplies, logistics that maintained siege. She didn't destroy it. Obvious. Would trigger response. Contaminated instead. Pinholes in fuel containers. Slow leaks. Rations with damaged packaging. Compromised seals. Medicine caps loosened, breaking sterility. Nothing obvious. Everything corrosive over time. Storm intensified. Wind hit 60 knots. Visibility under 10 meters. Conditions that grounded supply runs, stranded anyone outside, made Bunker truly isolated. She'd counted on this. Weather forecasts showed probability spike. Good odds, played correctly, were enough. 1,023 hours, back in primary position, watching through scope, wind violent enough that thermal signatures fragmented. Everyone blind, everyone cold, everyone waiting. But she'd waited longer, made it discipline, weapon. Patience was infinite if you trained for it. Radio traffic changed subtly. Not panic professionals but edge of concern. Operations to all stations. Storm intensity increasing. Maintain positions. Charlie copies. Bravo copies. Alpha copies. She watched, counting windows, ventilation ports, access points, mapping heat signatures, building mental model of interior layout. Storm raged. Mountain disappeared. Cassidy Brennan smiled slightly. Chaos wasn't random if you understood patterns. She'd studied these patterns long enough. 1,400 hours. Colonel Webb made the decision that would define everything that followed. Seal everything. Full lockdown. Lieutenant Hayes looked up from communications console, where he'd been troubleshooting satellite link for 3 frustrating hours. Sir? She's out there in this storm. We're not. That's our fundamental advantage. So we maximize it completely. Lock down every access point, every ventilation shaft, every port that isn't absolutely essential for life support. We turn this bunker into a vault, and we wait her out. Simple physics wins. It was sound, tactical thinking, textbook defensive doctrine. The bunker had been designed for exactly this scenario, a hardened position that could resist siege indefinitely. With everything sealed, they became immune to infiltration, sabotage, direct assault. The storm would do the work for them. Cassidy would either retreat or die of exposure within 48 hours. Dalton. Webb ordered. Voice carrying command authority. Initiate lockdown sequence. Alpha through Echo protocols. I want every external seal verified and double-checked personally. Yes, sir. The bunker came alive with purposeful activity. Blast doors engaged with heavy mechanical sounds that resonated through steel corridors. Ventilation systems switched to internal recycling mode with subtle pressure changes. Access hatches were methodically checked, secured, some welded shut for absolute certainty. Every interface with the outside world was systematically eliminated, transformed from potential vulnerability into impermeable barrier. In the security room, Hayes watched the procedures on multiple monitors, tracking each step of the lockdown. We're losing external sensor coverage. Locking down means cutting power to the perimeter grid. Acceptable trade-off, Webb said without hesitation. If she wants to get to us, she has to breach a sealed structure in complete whiteout. The physics make it impossible. The final door, the main entrance, 12-point locking mechanism closed with its characteristic sequence of mechanical snaps that Webb had come to know well. Dalton stood in front of it, checking each lock manually, tugging on the handle with professional thoroughness to verify proper engagement. "Lock it," he said to the specialist beside him. "She's secured." The specialist engaged the final safety, a redundant bolt that made the door effectively part of the rock face itself. No way to open it from outside without military-grade explosives. And explosives in this weather would be absolutely suicidal. Webb allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the best. Let the storm be his weapon. Let time and temperature do what bullets and tactics couldn't. In 48 hours, maybe less, this would be over. But something nagged at the edge of his thoughts. A detail he couldn't identify, a sense that the equation wasn't as simple as it appeared. Cassidy Brennan had come here knowing the weather forecast, knowing the terrain intimately, knowing she'd face exactly this kind of defensive posture. She wasn't stupid, she wasn't reckless. Every intelligence file said she was calculated, patient, unconventional. So why had she come? "Sir," Hayes said quietly, "external communications down, satellite confirmed gone, radio intermittent storm interference. We're isolated until weather clears." "How long?" "Storm peaks in 6 hours. Breaks up after. Workable conditions by tomorrow morning. 18 hours. Webb could manage that. Team well supplied, well trained, secure. Power, water, heat, morale good, everything controlled." Except control felt like illusion. Somewhere in Howling White, Cassidy Brennan counted on exactly that assumption. He walked corridors, checking sections. Men settling into siege routine rotations, maintenance, rest, professional, calm. Medical bay. Corporal Rivera organizing supplies. "How are medical stores?" "Full inventory, sir. 30 days if needed. Keep them accessible." Bunker felt solid, impregnable, steel and stone, human will in architecture. But castles fell, fortresses crumbled, history littered with impregnable positions defeated by thinking no one anticipated. 1,647 hours, storm peak, wind 70 knots, -28, visibility, absolute zero. Outside, nothing survived, nothing moved. Inside, lights hummed, heat maintained temperature, recycled air smelled of coffee and cleaning solution, everything secure, everything locked. Webb stood in operations, watching monitors showing static and white. Somewhere beyond that white, Cassidy Brennan was dead, dying, or waiting. He didn't know which concerned him most. Cassidy found the space at 1,422 before lockdown completed. Ventilation duct engineering diagrams showed, but tactical planning discounted too small for infiltration. Right. Too small, but not useless. Duct connected to air exchange. Even in lockdown, air had to flow, sealed doors and hatches, but not air, not if people wanted to breathe. She'd access duct from exterior point defensive plan hadn't prioritized, too exposed, too difficult, obvious death trap, true. But she wasn't infiltrating, she was listening. Duct carried sound, distorted distance, metal, airflow, but enough. Voices became murmurs, footsteps, vibrations. Internal activity created soundscape telling where people were, how they moved, when they gathered. Couldn't hear words, could hear rhythm, patterns of routine. Patterns meant predictability. She wedged into position outside duct opening, sheltered from worst wind, close enough to monitor, but not so close thermal from inside would detect. Storm was cover fury made heat detection useless, sound masked small noises. Hours passed. Didn't move except shifting weight occasionally, preventing cramps and frostbite. Discipline excruciating cold making, thinking difficult, discomfort screaming for relief, psychological weight of absolute stillness while storm raged. Trained for this. Months in Arctic, learning to outlast cold, make stillness natural state, find mental space where time became irrelevant and patience infinite. In bunker below, they were warm, comfortable, moving freely. Every advantage, apparently theirs. Except they'd locked in. She was not. They'd chosen to seal themselves in Boxes had limitations, finite resources, fixed positions, nowhere to maneuver if circumstances changed. She listened to rhythm, flow in corridors, noted when voices gathered, briefings, meals, heard generators, air circulation, distant equipment clang. They sounded confident, organized, professional, good. Confidence made comfortable, comfort made predictable. 1834. Change in air pressure through duct. Subtle shift indicating interior door opened near ventilation. Voices clearer for seconds, then muffled as door closed. Committed timing to memory. Small details accumulated into larger patterns. Larger patterns revealed vulnerabilities. Storm's peak arrived with ferocity, making previous severe conditions look optimistic. Wind felt like it could peel skin. Cold turned breath to ice instantly. Snow, horizontal, sandblaster of frozen water. Prepared for this. Right gear, position, mental conditioning. Didn't make comfortable, made survivable. In worst of it, she thought about why. Not tactical situation, deeper reason. Webb probably asked, why had she come? Simple. They expected her to run, hide, disappear, standard evasion. But doctrine was conventional patterns. Cassidy learned conventional patterns were how you got caught. Instead of running, came to the one place they thought she couldn't reach, turned strength into vulnerability, made fortress her advantage. Fortresses couldn't move. Adapt. Respond to threats they didn't understand. 2,156 hours. Long after dark. After peak passed, wind merely brutal instead of apocalyptic, she heard something in duct that made her smile. Argument. Voices raised just enough to carry, not clear words, tone obvious. Stress, disagreement, first cracks in professional composure. 18 hours locked would do that. Could handle it, but they'd feel it. Confinement, uncertainty. Growing awareness situation didn't quite make sense. She'd given nothing obvious to respond to. No attack, no direct threat, just small anomalies. Compromised sensors reporting green, satellite that wouldn't restore. Nagging sense, perfect position might have gaps. Psychological pressure, slow but inexorable. Like water freezing in cracks, expanding, splitting stone from inside. Night deepened. Storm continued, less violent. Cassidy remained, listening, waiting, letting time work. Inside locked fortress, secure from everything except own growing doubts. Doubt was most effective weapon. 0623 hours. Checkpoint Charlie failed to report. Hayes frowned. Charlie, this is operations. Radio check. Static. Charlie. Respond. Nothing. Hayes glanced at Webb. Could be equipment failure. Cold's hard on electronics. Send someone to check. Sir, the storm is decreasing. We need to know if Charlie's compromised. Two-man team. Constant radio contact. Specialists Morrison and Chen geared up. There and back, Dalton told them. No heroics. They cycled through airlock, moved toward Charlie's position. Storm manageable now. Visibility 70 meters, wind 30 knots. Dangerous, navigable. Webb watched thermal cameras. Two bright shapes against gray-white. 0647, Morrison's voice, approaching Charlie. No thermal signatures. Proceed with caution. 2 minutes silence. Then, operations. Charlie's position is, nobody here. Webb leaned toward console. Clarify. Empty, sir. Equipment here. Radio here. Heater running. No operators. Hayes checked roster. Charlie was Vargas and Klein. Both experienced. Search immediate area. Morrison came back strained. Sir, finding tracks leading away. Moving north into rocks. Multiple sets. Looks like they left voluntarily. Makes no sense, Hayes muttered. Webb's mind raced. Desertion? Unlikely. Compromise? By whom? One person couldn't force two armed operators to abandon position without fight. Medical emergency? They'd have radioed. Follow tracks. Carefully. 3 minutes. Operations. Found them. Status? Long pause. Sir, both unconscious. No visible injuries. Breathing. Vital signs present. Completely unresponsive. And sir, There's a message, written in snow. Says lock it. Operations room silent. Every head toward Webb. He stared at thermal display. Morrison, kneeling beside two signatures in snow. Mind rejected what he heard, searched for rational explanations, found none. Bring them back. Now. 20 minutes. Vargas and Klein back in bunker. Medical confirmed unconscious but stable. No injuries, no obvious cause. As if they'd fallen asleep mid-watch and walked into snow. Toxicology? Webb asked. Running tests. But sir, if drugged, how? Own food, water supply. Checkpoint was sealed. Webb had no answer. 0834. Alpha reported similar. Both operators unconscious. Message in snow. Lock it. 0. Nave. 0. 0. Bravo went silent. Webb watched defensive perimeter collapse piece by piece. 6 operators down. No explanation. No contact. No violence. Just messages and unconscious bodies. She's picking us apart, Dalton said quietly. How? 6 don't just fall unconscious simultaneously. But they did, Webb realized. He'd been thinking wrong from beginning, about siege warfare, defensive positions, conventional responses. Cassidy wasn't fighting conventional battle, psychological one. Lockdown perfect defensive solution became vulnerability because everyone outside was isolated, exposed to methods he hadn't anticipated. Pull everyone back. All external positions, everyone inside, now. Sir, that leaves supply corridor undefended. Supply corridor's already compromised. Get everyone inside before we lose more. Recall took an hour. 12 operators left active from 18. 6 unconscious in medical. Rivera with no explanation. Bunker felt smaller, confining. They'd locked in for security, now felt like trap. 1,147. First fuel generator coughed. Died. Backup kicked in, but Hayes's investigation revealed problem. Fuels contaminated. Water in mix. Every reserve canister. Webb closed his eyes. Pre-positioned cache. She'd found it. Hadn't destroyed it obvious. Sabotage subtly. Apparent only when resources failed. How long on backup? 18 hours. 20 if we shut down non-essentials. After that, Hayes met gaze steadily. Dark. And cold. Outside. Storm breaking. Visibility improving. Temperature rising. Should have favored defenders. But Cassidy wasn't outside. Everywhere around them, unseen, unheard, dismantling fortress piece by piece without firing shot. Webb finally understood. Lockdown hadn't secured her out. Locked them in. With her. Dawn from Storm was crystalline and brutal. Clear sky, -32, cold that turned metal, brittle, and skin black in seconds. Cassidy watched sunrise from 400 meters out. Elevated, concealed. She'd moved during darkness, knowing improved visibility made previous positions exposed. Through scope, bunker clear. Main entrance sealed. No external activity. They'd pulled everyone inside. 6 operators taken out simpler than seemed. Not drugs, traceable, carbon monoxide. Small canisters near ventilation intakes. Time to release during rotation. Odorless, tasteless. Symptoms like sleep. They'd wake with headaches, confusion, but recover. She wasn't trying to kill. Never had been. This was about something else. Radio crackled, monitoring their frequency since beginning. Webb's voice, strained but controlled. All stations, initiating emergency evacuation. Prepare to abandon facility in 30 minutes. She'd wondered how long before that decision. Contaminated fuel meant no power. Without power, bunker became tomb. Sealed, dark, freezing. No choice but leave. Leaving meant exposure. Giving up fortress. Moving through terrain where she held advantage. Airlock opened 0734. Operators emerged in tactical gear, weapons ready, defensive formations, 12+6 on stretchers. Professional execution, exactly right response. Except she wasn't where expected. Standard assumption, she'd positioned to ambush exit. So they counter-deployed, establishing perimeter, covering angles, ready for contact. She watched through scope, 400 meters distant, invisible against rock. No intention of engaging, no need. Evacuation wasn't their defeat. Evacuation was her victory. She'd made them abandon fortress, come into open, accept that defensive position. Entire tactical approach had been fundamentally compromised. Not through violence, through patience, precision, understanding how fortresses became prisons. Webb was last out, scanning ridgeline with binoculars, searching for sign. He knew she was out there, knew this was orchestrated, but couldn't see, locate, respond to invisible threat. Evacuation column formed 18 people, 6 on stretchers, moving down supply corridor at best speed, route predictable because terrain limited options. One main trail, alternatives, all exposed to observation from elevation. She tracked them through scope as they moved. Not as targets as confirmation. Retreating in good order, maintaining security, doing everything right. That was point. They hadn't failed. She'd simply operated in dimension their framework wasn't designed to address. 0847. Column disappeared around bend, heading toward extraction point, where command would have helicopters waiting. They'd get out, survive, injured would recover. But they'd lost Ridge. Cassidy remained another hour, watching bunker, trail, approaches, certain no one stayed behind. No surprises. 0953. Satisfied. Began own extraction, different route, direction, through terrain prepared over reconnaissance weeks, supply caches, rest points, alternative routes if pursuit developed. No pursuit, not in these conditions, not when evacuating injured first, regrouping, reassessing. By time anyone returned to broken spine, she'd be gone. Bunker would stand empty, monument to limitations of conventional thinking. She moved through snow, each step careful, conserving energy. Cold, intense, but manageable. Sky clear, mountain silent. Behind, ridge held only emptiness and wind. Command's response came 1434, long after evacuation column reached extraction. Webb stood in temporary operations center, heated tent, feeling inadequate, listening to debrief with frustration. "You're telling me," General's voice said over satellite, "one individual forced evacuation of 18-person unit from fortified position without a shot fired?" "Yes, sir." "Casualties?" "None. 6 incapacitated by carbon monoxide, all recovering." Long silence. "Colonel, help me understand." Webb had been asking same question. "Sir, we approached as conventional containment, defensive posture, secured perimeter. Assumed she'd attempt infiltration, assault, or withdrawal. She did none." "What did she do?" "Dismantled infrastructure systematically, compromised sensors without alerts, sabotaged supplies subtly, most critically, understood our fortress was also limitation." "Explain." "Bunker was impregnable. Meant we couldn't leave without losing advantage. By forcing situation where staying was untenable, contaminated fuel. Failing power made us choose between freezing or abandoning position. Either way, she won." Silence. Webb imagined calculations being made. Not just operational failure, fundamental challenge to doctrine. "Where is she?" "Unknown, sir. Lost track during evacuation. Could be anywhere in 50 kilometers. "Recommendations?" "Sir, respectfully, we can't catch her using conventional pursuit. She's demonstrated superior knowledge, doesn't engage unless serving purpose. Chasing is what she'd anticipate." "So we let her go?" "No, sir. But change approach. Stop thinking fugitive. Start thinking strategic asset. She's proving a point." "What point?" "That assumption's about defensive operations. Fortified positions, those have blind spots. She knows how to exploit them." General quiet. "Colonel, you're asking me to reassess decades of doctrine because one individual outmaneuvered you." "Yes, sir. I'll take it under advisement. Maintain perimeter." "Understood." Connection ended. Webb stood looking at displays showing nothing useful. Hayes approached. "Sir, medical cleared all 6. They're asking what happened." "Tell truth. Carbon monoxide from source we're investigating. Also asking about Brennan, whether she's hostile." Webb considered. 6 unconscious, supplies sabotaged, fortress abandoned. By conventional measure, hostile. But no one's seriously hurt. Sabotage calibrated to force evacuation without harm. Even message, lock, it wasn't threat. Commentary. "Tell them," Webb said. Cassidy Brennan is someone we need to understand before assumptions. She could have killed us. Multiple opportunities. Had us completely compromised, but didn't. That means something. Hayes frowned. Means she's playing longer game. Exactly. Until we understand that game, conventional responses won't work. As tent filled with personnel and equipment, Webb kept returning. Why had Cassidy come? Not to evade. She'd come to make point, demonstrate something, prove systems had vulnerabilities everyone ignored. She'd succeeded. Ridge stood silent, bunkers sealed, checkpoints abandoned, battlefield where no battle occurred. Webb stared at Mountain, knowing somewhere up there, Cassidy watched. Not with malice, just patient observation of someone understanding real victory wasn't territory. It was changing how people thought. That was far more dangerous. 3 days later, recovery team returned to Broken Spine to secure bunker and retrieve equipment. Found something unexpected. Main entrance, sealed with 12-point mechanism, had been opened from outside. Not breached, opened correctly. Proper sequence, as if someone had access codes. Inside, bunker exactly as left. Equipment in place, supplies untouched except contaminated fuel. Everything orderly, preserved, waiting. But in operations room, on main tactical display, someone left note. Not written, programmed into system, appearing on every screen when power restored. The fortress wasn't defeated by force. It was defeated by making you believe it was the only option. Next time, think about what you're locking out and what you're locking in. No signature, no threat, just observation. Sitting in center of most secure location, proof she'd been inside after they left. Accessing systems impossible to compromise. Recovery team reported to command. Note analyzed. Security reviewed. Investigations launched. But Cassidy Brennan was gone. Not hiding. Not running. Simply somewhere else, operating in space conventional tracking couldn't reach because it required thinking doctrine didn't accommodate. Webb, when he heard about Note, smiled slightly. He'd been right. She wasn't enemy. She was lesson. One that would take military long time to process. Some learned from defeat. Others just blamed. High in mountains, where snow-covered trails and wind-erased passage, Cassidy stood on ridgeline looking back toward Broken Spine, fortress invisible from distance, absorbed into landscape, just another terrain feature. She'd accomplished what she came to do. Demonstrated that assumptions about security, defense, tactical superiority, those could be turned into vulnerabilities by someone understanding psychology behind them. Military would study this, analyze, try to prevent recurrence, but they'd miss point. Point wasn't specific tactics. Point was thinking itself could be weaponized. Patience could defeat force. Sometimes weakest person controlled entire situation. She turned away, adjusting pack, checking compass. Another mountain range ahead, another operation planning, another point to prove. Snow fell lightly, covering tracks as she moved. Within minutes, no sign she'd been there. Behind, Broken Spine stood silent in winter light. Bunker sealed, checkpoints empty. Entire defensive position abandoned not by force, but by simple realization that safety it promised was illusion. Someone had locked it. She'd just proven locks only worked if everyone agreed on what they protected. And sometimes, thing you tried keeping out was already inside, waiting for you to realize fortress was never as secure as believed. Wind picked up, swirling snow across ridge, erasing boundaries between rock and ice and sky. Up there, in white emptiness, line between hunter and hunted, victory and defeat, inside and outside, disappeared entirely. That was exactly where Cassidy Brennan lived. Where no one could track her because they couldn't understand space she occupied. Where silence was louder than gunfire. Where patience outlasted every fortress. Mountain watched, impartial and eternal, as snow continued falling, covering everything, concealing everything, preserving mystery for anyone who wanted to learn. But learning required accepting you'd been wrong. And for most, that was hardest lesson. Storm passed. Ridge stood empty. Somewhere in white distance, Cassidy Brennan moved through terrain on no map, following rules no doctrine wrote, proving again the most dangerous opponent wasn't one who fought. It was one who understood exactly why you thought you'd already won. Snow-covered tracks, wind-erased passage, Ridge kept silence, as it had for millennia, indifferent to small dramas of humans who thought